Let us bring in Chad Wolf. Chad, got to get your reaction to this. Are you worried, as someone who is in the security space like yourself, are you worried that Biden got played here with this exchange in a way that will incentivize our enemies in rogue nations to kidnap Americans for their own prisoner swaps?
Well, I think that's certainly the concern here, right? Look, it's wonderful news anytime an American comes home, particularly from situations like this. But I think we have to remember at the end of the day, there's obviously still a U.S. Marine there in Russia. And I guess at the end of the day, this is a very high price to pay. You mentioned the merchant of death, a prolific arms dealer, led to American deaths at the end of the day. And the question is, was President Biden and this administration strong enough in advocating for all U.S. citizens to return from Russia? And I don't think that that's the case here. And I think the rest of the world is also looking at this. And we have to ask ourselves the question, does this embolden our enemies? There are 65 other Americans around the world being held captive and hostage. And what does that do to their fate at the end of the day? So I think there's a little bit, look, again, happy that a U.S. citizen is back on U.S. grounds. But I think we have to look at the other folks that are still out there, and what does that say to their fate?
Well, Brittney Griner does live in Phoenix, Arizona. The reason she's landing in San Antonio is because she's going to be taken to Brooks Army Medical Center, which is a place the government sends people who need to be debriefed. It's also a place that handles people who require sensitive medical treatment, people who have been tortured as well. So with that, what do you think Brittney Griner has been through over the past 10 months, and what does her future look like?
Well, it's unimaginable probably what she has been through for over 300 days. So, again, I think we're all celebrating that she is back home. There's a lengthy process that these individuals go through, and you'll probably see this over and report over it over the next several days. They'll be debriefed, trying to gather, as much as information as she has been through, and then, of course, be reunited with her family pretty quickly. But, again, I think this is a process. And I keep going back to all the other Americans that are out there. Again, we celebrate Griner being here, but I think our heart and certainly our thoughts need to go with Mr. Weiland and others that are still out there. And I think this administration, and hopefully they are doing everything they can to bring those Americans home as well.
Chad, you were the former acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Focusing on Victor Bout for a moment. How soon before Victor Bout is back out there arming our enemies and risking the homeland, American lives?
Well, I think that's the most concerning thing. Look, he's going to be free to operate, probably have some restrictions on him in Russia, but we're going to lose some visibility. We're going to lose some intelligence. Obviously, he's been behind bars, so his abilities have been severely diminished. What the Russian government allows him to do is very, very concerning. When we look at our enemies overseas and what we have to do from an intelligence perspective and a counterterrorism perspective to make sure that Americans are safe every day, we don't need an individual such as Mr. Bout back out there and doing what he was doing in the past. And so that is concerning. I'm hopeful, but we'll see that the administration got some assurances from the Russian government that he would not go back to what he was doing before. But again, I don't know that could be ever guaranteed. Yeah. And I think that is when we talk about a very high price to pay for this type of exchange.
Absolutely. And the Weiland family has been outspoken. They say that they are glad that this trade was made, although they're so sad that it didn't include Paul. And Paul's brother said after it was announced that it would be 1-for-1 without Paul, he said, I can't even fathom how Paul will feel when he learns. Paul had worked so hard to survive nearly 4 years of this injustice. His hopes had soared with the knowledge that the U.S. government was taking concrete steps for once towards his release. He'd been worrying about where he'd live when he got back to the United States, which is just so devastating to hear that he was already thinking about his future when he gets gets back to the United States, and this morning he's going to be waking up still in a Russian prison cell. Paul's brother David also said that the U.S. should take more law-breaking, Kremlin-connected Russians into U.S. custody because there are plenty of them out there. So he's saying be more proactive about grabbing one of the guys that Vladimir Putin wants so we can use that to get Paul back. How do you feel about that suggestion?
Well, I think that goes to the strategy of what this administration is trying to do to bring Mr. Whelan back. And I think there's a number of things that they can do. Hopefully those types of discussions and negotiations have been underway, not only, over the past several months, but hopefully over the past several years. So I'm hopeful, and I understand that the administration is not going to talk publicly about what is their strategy to bring Mr. Whelan, as well as others, back to the U.S. But again, I think all options should be on the table. This individual's been over there for 4 years, and I can only imagine the hope that he has every time he hears news about individuals and an exchange being likely. And so I think it's past time to bring this American back to the U.S., and hopefully that the administration has a very robust plan and an action plan to make that happen.
Chad, does our leverage in this negotiation improve if Joe Biden didn't handle the Afghanistan withdrawal so poorly, decreasing our standing in the world and decreasing the leverage with which Joe Biden had to work?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes, without a doubt. I think, when you hear the administration talk about that they had no choice, that they were given an ultimatum, it was Brittney Griner or no one. I think that goes to exactly to that question, which is we shouldn't be given that choice. The U.S. should be help setting dictate terms. And so it's kind of unfathomable, I think, to a lot of Americans that we're having Vladimir Putin tell us what the terms of a prisoner exchange are. And we should be demanding more. And so there's a variety of different ways that you go about these negotiations. And I think because President Biden is seen as probably not as strong as he could be around the world, that this has emboldened Vladimir Putin, the Russian government, as well as our other opponents and adversaries around the world that are also holding Americans. And what does that say to their fate? So I think others around the world were looking at this, and I think for the most part, people are saying, well, maybe the U.S. didn't get the best deal that they could.
So if this is emboldening Vladimir Putin and Russia got their arms trader back, does this impact the war in Ukraine at all? What do you think Vladimir Zelensky is thinking right now?
Well, absolutely. I think President Zelensky is certainly looking at what this individual has done in Ukraine over his history. I'm not sure that it has a measurable impact. Obviously, that conflict is ongoing and a variety of different aspects to it. I think it's something that the U.S. and this administration is trying to deal with. I don't think they've done that in a very, very well manner, and so I think we're going to have to continue to see that unfold. I'm not sure that this has a direct impact on that, though.
A fascinating morning as we look live right now. Reset this here for you. A plane believing to have been carrying Brittney Griner landing Kelly Field, San Antonio, Texas, in the scene. The AP reporting that she has arrived, Brittney Griner, on U.S. soil. And again, we believe that is the plane that we are looking at right now. Chad Wolf joining us. Obviously, Chad, we had you here on some other topics, but let's continue on talking about this major breaking news story. In the press conference earlier, Karine Jean-Pierre referenced a lot of, let's call it, woke bingo scorecard stuff as to why we should be happy that Brittney Griner is back home. Why did the White House, do you think, choose to politicize that and go that direction when really they should be focused on solely two things: celebrating the fact that an American is back on U.S. soil, but also lamenting the fact that Paul Whelan is not?
Well, I think it was a major misstep, and I think they're going to look back and say that was something that we shouldn't have done. Anytime that you have the press secretary talking about Miss Griner and the LGBT aspects of what she stands for or her messages, I don't think that they should be talking about that from the White House podium. Mrs. Griner was an American, and we needed to bring her home, and I think that is what most people care about at the end of the day. But to say, all the other woke aspects of that, it leads you to believe that that was their priority, that was on their mind on why they needed to bring her back. And hopefully that is not the case. Hopefully that was a misstep and a misspeak from the press secretary. But it's hard to imagine that that's the case. My guess is that was a planned remarks. And again, I think the majority of Americans kind of shake their head and say that's not what's important here. What's important is she was a U.S. citizen. She should not have been in a Russian prison for 300 days. It's good to have her back, but we